sleeping in the bomb shop. So I literally had a rack, a small bunk, squeezed between an old Second World War version Mark 8 torpedo and the slightly newer Mark 24 torpedo. So I joined the Navy literally 2 days after my 18th birthday, after basic training at HMS Raleigh, and then submarine and branch training at HMS Dolphin in Portsmouth. By the summer of that year, so I'm only 18 and a half now, I was joining HMS Splendid, which is a frontline sneaky boat, they're called, which basically means it went off spying on the Russians during the Cold War, intelligence gathering, following them around unnoticed, unseen, unheard, and collecting all this intelligence and information to feed back to the UK and other NATO vessels. So I'm 18 and a half on a sneaky boat. So part of me thought, yay, I'm James Bond. I'm doing all this secret Cold War spying mission. And the other part of me thought, this is quite scary. I'm actually going to be behind enemy lines with all sorts of ships shooting and practicing and playing with depth charges, not even knowing that we're there. So the chances of getting accidentally killed were quite high. Also at the same time, the Cold War is on. So we had a strong chance of escalating the Cold War into an actual war if we were discovered or found out. So the pressure was massive. Not just the pressure of being under the water and the actual physical pressure, just the mental pressure of being responsible and part of a crew that were on a top secret mission. Top secret in so much as not only had we signed the official Top Secret Act, we had to sign all sorts of other weird special named secret acts just unique to this particular patrol. Some of which we signed and the rest of the crew didn't even know what we were doing, or in some cases even know where we were. So that the poor engine room guys stuck back in the engine room looking after the propulsion system, looking after the nuclear reactor, they only ever came forward into the front part of the submarine where the control room is to go to their sleeping quarters and food. So we weren't even allowed to communicate with some of our poor engine room guys and let them know where we were, what we were doing. As far as they're concerned, we just left Plymouth, we're underwater for 3 months, and then we surfaced again in Plymouth, and they weren't entirely sure where we'd been. My first day on board a Cold War nuclear submarine, HMS Splendid. It was in the summer of '87, so the Cold War was still very much on. I remember going down on board the first day, walking from the dockyard jetty, walking down the gangplank towards this black, sleek, mischievous-looking torpedo platform, thinking, wow, what's inside there? Stopped, paused, saluted to the flag, and thought, right, this is it, I'm on board. Walked up to the sentry, introduced myself. He showed me down the main access hatch, which was this almost vertical ladders heading down into the depths of the submarine. So the first thing that struck me was the smell. So it's a combination of diesel, hydraulic oil, electrics, human smells, and all sorts of other smells wafting up, which was quite unique to a submarine. Not unpleasant, but certainly a bit strange. Anyway, I went down these ladders into the back end of the control room on what's called one deck. And the next thing that struck me was how cramped it was. Given that the thing was 270 odd feet long and weighed 5,000 tons, I thought it was quite spacious. Not like a hotel, but certainly more spacious than it was. So there's pipes everywhere, gauges, valves sticking out. I'm 6'2", and I just about had enough headroom without stooping. But literally all around you were these gauges and pipes. It was very much like a 1960s International Space Station or a submarine from the Second World War. So that was a bit of a surprise. So other than the flashy computer equipment and stuff like that, the rest of it looked very much old school, which I thought was quite cool, but at the same time, a little bit scary. Scary in so much as I was still a new trainee, so I wasn't a qualified submariner yet. And part of what you have to do on board, takes about 3 or so months, is literally learn all of these valves, all this equipment, all the machinery. So you have to be a jack of all trades, so that theoretically, whatever department you are on board, if the shit hits the fan, you've got to know what to do. Whether you're in the engine room or in the torpedo room, in the bunk space, in the control room, you had to know everything So I looked at it all and thought, well, I don't even know how to change the oil on my car yet. Never mind figure out how to work all this stuff out. It felt like I had to have the same kind of knowledge and brain power as a London taxi driver learning the knowledge, except in a highly pressurized, scary, underwater, dangerous environment. So that all happened in my head in about 10 seconds of going down these scary ladders. Got to the bottom of the first set of ladders. One of the chief petty officers, my divisional officer, greeted me. Didn't get a chance at that stage to look around the control room, which would be where I worked, where all the submarine, the periscopes and everything are. Took me down another flight of ladders onto 2 deck, which is where most of the crew's eating and sleeping quarters are. So I thought, okay, he's going to show me to my bunk space now. I've got a little kit bag over my shoulder. He showed me the locker where I had to store my kit, which was literally no bigger than a small set of drawers. Certainly nowhere to hang your uniform or anything like that. Just crammed everything into this little drawer. We then bypassed the bunk space and thought, well, where's he taking me now? I thought he was going to show me to my bunk. We went down this another tiny hatch onto the 3rd deck of the submarine into what's called on a submarine the bomb shop, which is basically where the torpedoes are and the torpedo tubes. And I thought, well, I'm not quite sure why I'm going down here. He then explained to me that trainees on board spend their first few months until they're a qualified submariner sleeping in the bomb shop. So I literally had a rack, a small bunk, squeezed between an old Second World War version Mark 8 torpedo and the slightly newer Mark 24 torpedo. So those are my bed buddies, which is not quite as cozy as when I'd left my parents' home, snuggled up in my bed with my teddy bear. The teddy bear had suddenly turned into these massive, intimidating looking torpedoes. So that was my first introduction to life on board a nuclear hunter killer submarine. Stored my kit in there, then went back up to the control room, and that's when I got to see where I would work when the submarine finally went to sea and we dived. Being a tactical systems operator, my job would be mostly in and around the control room. So literally right next to the periscopes, captain sitting right behind me, and then various plots and charts that we had to fill in and create for him so he had a tactical picture of what was going on around him. The other place he showed me that I would work, back down on 3 deck, was this really small room with a special notice on the door. Such a secret room, in fact, that only a handful of the crew, the captain and the tactical system branch, were allowed in there. So the rest of the crew weren't even allowed in this room, such was the secrecy level of the equipment. And sometimes the extra crew that we had, which were Russian translators, so that when we were ultimately spying on enemy ships up in and around Russia, they would listen out for the crew noise on board these Russian ships and write down any intelligence and information they can gather. So that was called the Warner Shack. So that was on 3 deck, the control room being on 1 deck. Quickly, I was back up onto the casing. The casing of a submarine is the main deck, basically the upper part of the submarine. It's just black, pretty much featureless, other than the fin, the tower in the middle that houses the periscopes. So it's back up on board deck, helping the crew store ships. So all the food and everything we would need for the length of patrol is basically squeezed into every kind of corner and orifice of the ship that you can think of. There's a freezer for some of the frozen food, but everything else is pushed into any nook and cranny and crevice. And you soon realize that the submarine is just a giant machine, and the humans are kind of thought of secondary, and fit some humans in to be able to operate this. So it's like living and working inside of an engine. So nothing at all like a hotel. If it was likened to a hotel, my room would be in the basement, in the boiler room, with a pipe jutting out into my head. So not quite what I imagined, but at the same time, quite cool, a little bit scary, especially when you look at all this stuff you had to learn and figure out to be an active member of the ship's company.